Great, thank you very much. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining the latest in the Herman Miller Insight series. And I can see more and more people are joining, which is fantastic news. We hold these webinars every 2 weeks and we have a great range of speakers coming up, and some of the previous speakers are available on our YouTube channel. So do make sure that you check that out. I'm going to be sharing with you today some research that was done by a head of research and a product designer. Before I do that, I wanted to introduce you to a product designer of today. Chris, could you put on your video and unmute yourself? That would be great. I want to introduce you to a guy called Chris Nutman. And Chris is a product designer, and I came across Chris. I attend an event regularly in the northeast of England called Rise in Design, but that's of course moved to the virtual world. And I came upon Chris, who has got this incredible product and idea, and I've given him 5 minutes to make you aware of it, because this is an incredible initiative. Chris, over to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Mark. Just to repeat what you did, is my audio okay? Yeah.
Perfect. Carry on. You're fine.
Excellent. So firstly, I'd like to thank yourself, Mark, and the guys at Herman Miller Insight Group for giving me this time and space to share our message. And also thanks to the attendees for listening in. So my name's Chris, and I am the founder of a charity named Global Teacher, and we are on a mission to teach 1 million marginalized students by 2025. If you could go to the next slide, please. This whole project and idea was born at university when I was conducting research for my dissertation. And as you can imagine, I found a host of shocking statistics, such as, according to the United Nations, 15% of the world's adults are illiterate. And my project became about asking why to all of these questions. And it turns out one of the biggest barriers to education in remote parts of the world is a lack of resources. And further to this, almost a third of people around the world don't have access to basic 3G, and also over 1 billion people have no electricity. So these are the design challenges as a student that I was facing, and these are the many barriers to education. If you go to the next slide, please, Mark. So our solution is a device, a portable device named Pod, and Pod is a low-cost solar power projector that makes digital education available and accessible anywhere in the world with a bit of sunlight and a wall to project upon, without the need for internet or electrical means connectivity. So it allows really for offline and off-grid learning, and we envisage pods to be deployed and sent to remote rural schools around the world to make digital education available no matter what your background is, and really just give them the best chance at basically growing and empowering themselves in life. Next slide, please, Mark. And as well as a real grand vision of making digital education available for all, we are acutely aware of the fact that since the introduction of the coronavirus, the uptake of digital, for example, we're on a digital platform now, but especially in education, the uptake of digital has increased. However, what's often coined as the bottom billion will still remain unable to access digital education. So we have a real passion and a desire to end this digital divide and really bridge the gap between those who are pulling away, adopting digital solutions, and that bottom billion who still don't have the means to access it. Next slide, please, Mark. So as I said, very short and sweet, but our brand mission is to make digital education accessible and available for everyone in the world. And with our hashtag 1 million marginalized, we hope to get everyone involved in this mission and really back us in the kind of funding and production of our solar power projectors to get them to those rural schools around the world. We're currently partnered with a charity who works in Tanzania, and we're planning to run our pilot in about 2 months. We were planning to go there last year, but we didn't have time. We are actually at a stage in the prototype development of our projector where we're seeking electronics and software support. So I'm open to conversations about that. But mainly, thank you for the time, and thank you for taking an interest. I can see your messages in the chat in the project, so it really means a lot, and all your support as well. Thanks again, Mark, and thank you for listening.
Chris, thank you very much. If you want to turn off your video or mic, but I suggest you take a screenshot of what you see. And yes, in response to your questions, I will send you the link to Chris. And also, if Chris is okay, we'll share the slides. I think you'll agree with me. This is incredibly inspiring and great to see the work that Chris is doing. So let me move on to my section, if I may. I'm here to share with you some research that was done over 50 years ago and was published in a book called The Office, a Facility Based on Change. I also want to apologize because I am going to break all the rules of presenting with PowerPoint. Rule number one, don't have lots of words on your slide. I'm going to break that rule because literally I am going to be putting the words from the book up quite regularly. Second rule of PowerPoint is that you don't read from the slides, but of course I'm going to be quoting from the book. Again, as I present this, please bear in mind that this was written over 50 years ago. And we often say this, that the past can be an anchor or a sail. This is a pretty good life lesson where actually you can either use the past to drive you forward or it can hold you back. And so what we have done regularly is to look into the research that we've done in the past to inform our future. And just so that you know, we will be giving away 10 copies of this book to 10 lucky attendees of the couple of hundred or so that are on. So a little bit of background to this guy called Robert Probst, and you can see some of this. He was quite a mixture of a graphics artist, a teacher, and then he was appointed, importantly, as the president of Herman Miller's Research Corporation in 1960. And in 1968, the turning point for Herman Miller in the bulk office furniture industry was the design of Action Office, which was the first panel-based system. It was never designed to be a cubicle, and I will quote something from Robert Probst later on and show you some images. He also continued to get involved with a healthcare product for us. But before that and outside of that, you will see that his experience is quite wide. It wasn't focused just on furniture. He was a product designer. He was an inventor. He was a problem solver. And some of those problems you can see here, like an electronic tagging system for livestock, a mobile office for a quadriplegic. Robert Probst was around at a time when there were some really key people in Herman Miller, and I'll give you a minute to see if anyone can recognize any of these. If you want to put it in the chat box, there's no prize, but these were very key people. Yeah, someone's recognized Charles in there, so that's Charles Eames. Anyone else want to go for anyone else in there? No, you're all very quiet or not quick enough. So here we are. So Charles Eames and Ray Eames, his wife. Yeah, well done, Matthias. Ray, George Nelson, DJ Dupree, the founder of Herman Miller, Alexandre Girard, who was both a graphic, a designer, and a fabric designer, and then Robert Probst at a time when Herman Miller was just sort of at its height, and it continues to grow. But what came out of the product at the time was this, which is a product called Action Office. An Action Office, as you can see here, is a panel-based system. But what I want to do is bring you to the research that was done and published in this amazing book, published over 50 years ago, The Office of Facility Based on Change. As I read it, remember it was written a long time ago. And I love this, and I'm giving you the heading that he gave as well. And I warn you, the English is actually what I say, quite classic English as well. And many times I have to read this again and again because it's quite deep English. For most of us, the office is a place where we go to suffer a variety of environmental accidents. Some turn out to be advantageous, even to the point of giving unfair leverage over others. Most of the time, however, they are bad accidents, wasters of effectiveness, vitality, health, and motivation. The key here for Robert Probst was how you plan a space and how you allow people to use that space, and even where they are sat can affect their progression. And particularly in what was then, and in still companies, still today, some companies, was a very hierarchical, how you were placed and how you were laid out could give you an unfair leverage over others. But that thing there, that's most time, they're bad accidents, wasters of effectiveness. And this is because what he saw was very much bad planning, where desks were just placed into a space and people were kind of given allocated spaces, and the closer that you were to the boss, probably the more important you were, and it gave you this kind of unfair advantage. Do feel free to share questions, but just to let you know, I will pick them up at the end. So he started to talk about how the office had evolved. And he said this, that the 50 years has brought, whoops, not too sure what's happened there. 50 years has brought little change to the functional format of offices. Office work has undergone a revolution, and the physical environment lags behind. And that, of course, is our challenge today, that work in the recent year has undergone a revolution and some physical environments lag behind. I can't quite say that I was working 50 years ago, but I was working 45 years ago, and some of you have may spotted where I accidentally clicked on the next slide that I am in the next slide. That is me there, where I am in an office from 1978. So this was 10 years after this book was written, and hopefully you can see which one is me. This was a wallpaper manufacturer. Our best-selling wallpaper was on that wall behind me, the wood effect wallpaper. But this offices was very hierarchical. The big room behind was actually the room where the computer was kept and a telex machine because it was so noisy. But it was very hierarchical, very command and control. Obviously quite older style technology. However, there started to come a change. And Robert Probst started to talk about this constant state of radical change. And many of you would have heard of Gartner's hype cycle. But here he talked about human organizations have always been natural places of change, reflecting the organic nature of life. What is different now is the pace of change and the prospect that it will become faster and faster. And the point that he was trying to make here was that as humanity had coped with change because it was gradual. But what suddenly started to happen, and here you will see he refers to the things like the number of telephones, the resolution of technology, the total horsepower, that suddenly that change accelerated really, really fast. Whereas we were used to evolutionary change, What he is saying is what we started to see is revolutionary change. Now, does that sound familiar? Because that's, again, what we've gone through for the last year, is that change has been accelerated beyond our imagination. He then started to talk about the grow or die state of organizations. He said, not only must we accept the change, but we've got to adjust to this accelerated growth. And I love this part here that he said the total behavior of an organization, its goal, values, people, defines the true growth structure required. This is workplace strategy in its very early form. What he was saying is, what's good for one organization may not be good for another. In fact, as a part of our living office research, we said this, that the next big thing isn't for you. In other words, you can't have a Google Office unless you are Google. And this whole idea that as you grow, and the conditions to help you grow to become an office that is living and developing, it might be different, the conditions that you need to the conditions that someone else might need. So it's the total, it's the culture, it's the goals, it's the values. That's what decides how you need to grow. And that's even more important in this current climate as we look to get to revisit what workplace means, what the whole work experience means, and do be inspired by other companies, learn from what they're doing, but don't necessarily copy them. He then talked about the big communication accident, and I love this because, remember, this is 1968, because we can now generate, project and multiply information with ease. We are facing a crisis in quality. We have more, but is it worth investing our involvement? And I love this. And by the way, a lot of the images that I'm sharing with you are black and white and grainy because they're just screen captures from the book. But he was even talking then, and I think this again, we have so much data, we have so much knowledge, we have so much information. Our challenge is, what is the information that we have that's worth investing our involvement? And that's particularly the case with workplace now. Incredible development of apps doing great work out there that can monitor anything and everything. But is that data going to add to your company's growth? More importantly, is it going to improve the experience of the user? Another section that he had was called the new professions. And I love this. The new professions, the renewed rise of individuality as a value, and the great diversity in what one may be required to do in an office, does not allow a continuation of sterile uniformity with status as the only definition. How long did it take for us to solve this issue that we were giving people places based on their status, not recognizing that they were doing different tasks in different settings as well? So not about sterile uniformity. It was a very much about variety. And in fact, we probably ourselves do more than one profession. So incredible as it is, sometimes we are doing more than one job and a one task, and the setting where we do that isn't going to be the same. And neither can you be overly prescriptive to say, if you are working on an Excel spreadsheet, you need to do it in this kind of space. Because when you are human, we are all very different. And how someone likes to work on an Excel spreadsheet is very different to others. So again, this is a great warning. Do not make assumptions and come up with a sterile uniformity as you look at what the world of work might look like next. He also started to quote from Douglas Murray McGregor, Theory X and Theory Y. And I love this, that he referred to this, and this is Theory X and Theory Y. This kind of reductive theory, X, it assumed that management was a process of ordering and forbidding as a means to assure performance. You can do this, you can do this, you can do this, you must do this, you will do that, and you cannot do this. That was Theory X. But Theory Y assumed that it's natural for people to seek responsibility and that they enjoy it. So here's my thoughts about the last year. A lot of us have been suffering with reductive theory X, not because management have necessarily decided that's what they want to do. It's just that it's been forced upon us. And that I want to seek responsibility and choose, but those choices are limited because all I can do at the moment is work from home. Now, I do know that autonomy is a great motivator, but some people like more autonomy than others. But also out of this, he started to talk about status orientation being converted to goal orientation. Now, this sounds like it's recently been spoken about quite a lot, that it's no longer about status, it's about what my goals are. And he then says the use of space and hierarchical furnishings will undergo major readjustment. I think we've got there, but we're not there completely yet. I want to challenge you to think about your people that are working from home. I'm a man of a certain age who lives in a nice 4-bedroom house, and I've got a nice private office at home. Not everyone has that situation where they are today. What are you doing to give them a sense of responsibility and supporting them how they want to work? He then talked about the office as a thinking place. And this, I'm going to read this. I want you to think about this, and I'll tell you what I think he's saying here. The real office consumer is the mind. The subject starts there. More than anything else, we are dealing with a mind-oriented living space. For me, the point he's making here is how space affects our cognitive processes and our cognitive behaviors, and inevitably affects our well-being. And we all know how space affects us and makes us feel. I was very fortunate yesterday to have a day off and go for lunch in a hotel with a beautiful central arcade, which was open to the elements, so we were keeping the rules. That whole experience, from the minute I arrived to the minute I left, we were made to feel incredibly welcome by the people, but the space affected how we felt. And you know what? I probably paid a lot more than I would normally pay, but I don't regret paying that because it was that whole experience. It was mind-oriented, and work is like that. Place affects how we feel, it affects our behavior, it affects our productivity, it affects us. It really does matter when you're designing space. I don't have time to go into the story, but if you don't believe me, go shopping to IKEA and you will find how when you leave, you spent more than you were going to, because it's a mind-oriented living space. They've created it to affect you. He also talked about, and I love this, this was an early version of Action Office, which actually never really took off, but is very collectible today. He talked about multi-workstations, closely related to the need to develop elaborate work situations in an office is the need for separate work units. Somewhat rare in offices now is the person who has only one job, one thing to do. Typically, we have multi-responsibilities, which are to be treated separately. This is activity-based working over 50 years ago. This whole idea that we aren't always going to be sat at a desk. We are going to be in different settings. We are going to be doing different activities. We are going to have different levels of productivity, multi-responsibilities which have to be treated separately. And again, here, I warn you not to be prescriptive and assume accountants want to work like this and lawyers want to work like this. Give people choice. I also like the fact that he started to talk about conversation, and this is one of my favorite quotes from this. The business of people talking to each other in offices is a very serious consideration. It is by far the most expensive achievement of offices, the grouping of people in ways that allows conversational exchange. That's why we did, I say recently, a few years ago, some work with Nigel Oserland about the psychology of collaboration. But the other thing is, I also think that there is this kind of hierarchy of communication, which I will come on to as well. But if you're going to have an office and it's to support people to talking together, remember they might not be talking together all the time as well. But one of the most expensive reasons to have an office is for people to talk together, because we can do this as well. However, he did then follow it up with this. He said face-to-face involvement is the premier communication tool, unmatched for subtlety and efficiency, but also a present wasteland of mysterious inhibitions and limitations. It requires revitalization. And I would say that's definitely the case now. In fact, I often think about the hierarchy of communication, and we are kind of slightly down that hierarchy. This is better than just audio, because some of you, if you've got the technology, can see my face and see my expressions. But of course, I can't see yours. I can see no reaction. I can see that there are 200 people on, but I can't see what you're doing, whether you're engaged. Although interestingly, WebEx now do a tool which tells me whether you're engaged or not. I have no idea how that measures it, but at the end of it is an engagement level, which kind of scares the life out of me, but it still doesn't help this experience. So I talk about the hierarchy of communication and this face-to-face communication. It really does matter. And everything below that is a substitute, but some are very good substitutes. And the quality of the communication has increased and increased and increased beyond imagination. And who knows how long it will be when we will all be in a conference room and we will be holograms, because I think that will eventually come. But I have to tell you, there's 200 on the call. I would rather do 10 presentations of 20 people in a room anytime than just one presentation to 200 people. I miss that interaction, that face-to-face. For me, it's the premier communication tool. You've got a challenge. When people return to the workplace, and some are still working at home, how will that hybrid communication experience be for people when some are virtual and some are physical, and that becomes the norm? Huge challenges in that. So another thing that Robert Probst started to talk about all this time ago was sit, stand. Look at this. There's a picture of Churchill here. But what Robert Probst said is proportioning some of our work to stand-up workstations would do more than anything else to overcome sedentary decline. The office can be kinetic, in other words, constantly active and moving. It can be alert. It can be a vigorous environment. How long did it take for us to get to that sit, stand? In fact, we say sit, stand, move, repeat. Really important that this, we recognize this idea has been around for a long time. It took us a long while to get there. And I'm pretty sure there's some ergonomists on and will have a lot to say about that. And then he started to talk about this, the whole idea. And remember, he was developing a system called with screens which give privacy. But he said, is privacy the only answer to what we need in offices? Certainly not. We need involvement. We cannot exist without a full, healthy exchange with others. Involvement is an essential need, a good idea to be part of, visible, wanted, needed, recognized, part of the family of activity. It is about working alone, but it is also about being better together. And that whole idea that we need an exchange with others. But here's the thing. Obviously, the work I did with Nigel Oseland looks at introverts and extroverts. And introverts are happy to chat and converse. And a lot of them are not shy, but what they do like to be is in control of that exchange and communication. That's what you need to be enable people, is to be in control of that communication. But privacy isn't the only answer. We need to be involved. And workplace strategists, you probably have much better workplace outcomes when you have involved the people in the decisions about those workplaces as well, as to what they look like. And we have a concept that we call living office. And the idea is that something that's living needs constantly refreshing and constantly looking at. And when it isn't working, you then change it. The next thing I wanted to bring up was this. He talked about the war of communication devices. 1968, I'm not too sure what communication devices there were, but does anyone know what the picture on the right-hand side, what that is from? Anyone want to put that in the chat box? I can see it. Does anyone know what that is actually from? It's from a device that was in the office. It's slightly more than a computer tape, Bridget. It's ticker tape, but from what machine? What was the machine that this was for? Telex, well done, Jos. This is a telex tape. And I used to be a telex operator. That picture that I sadly burdened you with, that brown and cream office, I was also a telex operator. We could live message people, but it cost so much money that we would type the message on the ticker tape and then send it. But he said this: the office is deluged with new devices, each one proposing improvement and asking for investment, space and implementation. And he was absolutely right, because it took a long while before people became the forefront of office design, because technology was what took over, trying to fit in all the technology. It was technology first, and people had to fit into that technology, often because it was large and cumbersome, and people had to work around that. Large desks, large screens, large technology. And I think we're now at a point where technology can support whatever it is, the way that we work, and it is enabling us to work the way that we now. But I love this war of communication devices. And he started to talk about change, and he did talk also about mobility. It's the lack of mobility in our physical facilities that's the most stubborn laggard in offices. And any of you that are looking at changing your offices and you haven't got a very flexible space, well, no, it's a huge challenge. A great many of our irritations stem from services and facilities that respond too slowly or not at all to our new objectives and values. It's our buildings, furnishings and services that have to be revisualized and revitalized. And by buildings here, I would include our homes. What is that experience here? How now the technology was up and running very quickly, but I would still suggest to you, you have people working at home in very bad environments. You need to do something about that really soon. But the whole idea that the challenge is that some of you are thinking, okay, I can't really do anything until my lease is up in 2 years' time, because your space isn't as flexible as you wanted it to be. Buildings, furnishings and services have to be revisualized. and revitalize. Okay, and then when he developed this product, he talked about the new rules that there should be about office design, and it relates to what I've just said as well. He talked about a forgiving principle. We must be allowed to change our minds. And any of you that will know the book by Neil Usher called Elemental Workplace will remember that what he talks about is that workplace is always in beta mode. It is never finished. It is never perfect. We must be allowed to change our mind, because here's your problem. You are doing strategy often 6 months, a year before the client finally moves in, or you are the client and the strategy was done a year ago. Things need to change. And boy, look at what's happened in the last year. There needs to be a forgiving principle, and we need to be able to change with grace, to get that resolved solution with grace. This is not a blame game. This is, look, things have changed. We need to achieve a well-appointed and resolved solution. But one thing I had to look at, because he had this in the book in 1968, online planning and expression to avoid facility obsolescence. Now, when you and I hear online today, we think of technology. But here, what he meant was online being at hand, being readily available, where you didn't have to call a team of experts from outside, that you could change things very easily with your own facility team, or a facility provider could very easily change it, and that you could do that to hand. And then he talked about planning was the key to expression, the right to be different. One of the regrettable conditions in present offices is the tendency to provide a formula kind of sameness for everyone. It takes a serious organizational rebel to overcome this institutionalized expression. You need to treat people as shoppers. You need to give them choices. Really, really important. Think about the individual. Industrial psychology is widely used as a hiring tool. The investment in individual understanding can be usefully invested in facility understanding for each performer. This is now going down to the individual and not putting people in groups. Don't assume Generation X always want the same. Generation Z, baby boomers, the accountants and lawyers always want the same. But basically, look, trying to understand your people, and tied in with that ability to change with grace is the ability to adapt it to suit them. That's why we use the term living office. And we say this, that here, interestingly, the number one planner is the administrator. It may surprise some to learn that the primary planner on a continuous basis must be in the organization itself and represent management level responsibility. And some FMs and designers here are going, hooray, yes, that's absolutely right. That it can be a service provider, but it needs to be embedded in the company and understand the culture and the needs within the organization. I've nearly finished, but I wanted to address this whole idea of enclosure and access that Robert Probst talked about. He said this: the classical human search for environmental support has imbued us with very discrete feelings about space and enclosure. And he started to put these up, this whole idea that we have different levels of privacy. And this whole idea that it's called social fugal and social petal, where we push people away or we pull people towards us. And I'm not saying that we need to go screens to go back high, but the reason I'm showing you this is to show that he actually put a box to say cubicles were bad, and look what happened. In 1998, a journalist interviewed Robert Probst, who was then 77 years old, for Metropolis magazine. He defended the features that made his design so popular, its austerity and its flexibility. But he conceded that he hadn't been willing to understand he conceded what he hadn't been willing to understand then was this: The dark side of this is that not all organizations are intelligent and progressive. And they are run by lots of crass people who take the same kind of equipment and create hellholes. And what he was talking about here is without true strategy, without true design input, without true understanding of the needs, suddenly it was a money-driven decision to squeeze as many people in. Four-sided enclosure is bad for the wide-awake and activity-oriented person. He is isolated, insulated, and remote. His ability to be part of an organizational family is diminished. Really important that it's those levels of privacy and that people have control of it. And I always like to think that privacy is not always confidentiality. Sometimes privacy is just about not being disturbed. So what about the long-term game? How do you overcome this? And so in looking at the impact change rates are having on our lives over a very short time span, there's a reason to wonder if we will be constantly abandoning old positions for new, leaving behind rather vast heap of yesterday's obsolete answers. Is there a way to stabilize the effect of change? There is. One way is that you have what we call a living office or in a beta mode. And we've created something that we've called the engine of prosperity, which is a new landscape of work, something that's constantly being revisited, reassessed, where you are changing with grace and you're resolving the problem. The man that appointed Robert Probst was DJ Dupree, and he said this: in the long run, all businesses and business leaders will be judged not by their profits or their products, but by their impact on humanity. I really appreciate your time, and for all the attendees that I will be drawing names out of the hat afterwards, thank you very much for joining us. Bertie, over to you. I'll stop sharing, and over to you.
Fantastic, Mark. As always, that was really brilliant. Really appreciate it. I've got one or two questions, and if anyone else has any questions, feel free to post them now, and I'll try and get to all of them. The very first question I have is from Brian, and he says, do you think we'll see office move into a hybrid or of hotel, retail, residential, university campus, using those individual influences to create a multi-dimensional space?
I think we could. The challenge is whether there's the will, and that's always the challenge. I think there was some great work done by CBRE a while ago that looked with Ben Munn. I'm going back with the last recession a few years ago, that said, could we reuse some of those empty shops for working spaces? You know, that hub and spoke model. So I think that's kind of potential, but you're already seeing it in hotels. We've got product in the Waldorf in London, where they're kind of that hybrid model of both staying and working. And already Starbucks were doing it in some of their places. I think that one of the challenges is you've used the term hybrid, and a lot of us don't quite understand what that fully means. And it's interpreted very, very differently. But I think there is opportunity to use spaces. What about your libraries? What about church buildings or mosques that have facilities that you could maybe use locally? And I guess the question goes back to is, why am I going to an office? And if it's for that social need, how can I get that? But I also think that what we're going to start seeing is us sharing spaces with not necessarily with clients, but making sure our spaces are open to others to use as well, as we do in our showroom as well. Are you there, Bertie?
That's great, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
I'm always blown away where I listen to you talk and it's comparing 1968 to 2020, and it's the exact same issue. So even though I might have a list of questions, for me, it's every time I see this, it's mind blowing that we have the exact same issues around privacy, collaboration. Love to see it. My next question is from Bridget. She says activity-based work relates to activities with spaces, but I tend to feel that spaces should be designed not for activities, but for feelings, responses, so people can choose the spaces they prefer for a task. Would you agree with that? What do you think?
Yeah, so one of the things that we tend to call spaces settings, and I think that if you get a setting right, it doesn't matter what you might do 3 or 4 different things in a setting. I think of a plaza, Bridget, a kind of a central hub where some people can work really comfortably on their own, others can collaborate, and others can contemplate. So it's just about giving people a variety of choices. And for me, that's what activity-based working is giving people a selection of choices and let them decide what activity they do that. And you were right about feelings, because sometimes one day where I want to work might be very different to do the same task from another. And I think it's just a variety of choices, and we need to free people to be able to do that. And so it's a setting that supports a variety of activities. And I think that's where we need to move towards, especially as we look at what office is going to look like in the future.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. If anybody's got any other questions, feel free to pop them in now. I've got one last one from Lizzie, and Lizzie asks, what viable solutions are there for successful hybrid working? When I mention hybrid here, I mean some in the office, some working remotely.
Yeah. So three-legged stool needed here, which you will hear in any workplace presentation. Get the technology right, get the management right, and then sort out the places. And what does that look like? And that could well be local places, it could be a co-working space, it could be a differently designed office, but you've got to support it via all those things. The technology's got to work, and the way that you manage it. And I think the HR for me is the biggest issue. And someone said, what's workplace going to be like in 10 years' time? I wonder whether it will be a lot different, because here's one of my thoughts, and this is not always research based, but I'm a man of a certain age, as I've said. I hear some incredible statements from companies. We're going to let people work anywhere they want, anyhow they want, and work remotely. They can have as many holidays as they want, which comes from that very senior level. Your challenge comes if you've still got a command and control middle management level. And that, for me, is where some of the biggest barriers are going to be to how to move to a new way of working and capitalize on all the changes that we've seen over the last 12 months to make sure it works. That is, where are your obstructors? Where are the people that won't openly come out and say this is not a great idea, but the way that they manage, the way that they reward, the way that they promote is about people working in the old way rather than working in the new way.
One last one for you, Mark. One from Maggie Law. Do you ever feel disappointed that offices has not moved forward or changed as much as contemporary opinion describes?
Listen, Maggie, I look at that as an opportunity. Look, there's been 200 people on this call. Fantastic to have you on, but we're all enlightened. In reality, you've decided to join this call, and a lot of us from enlightened companies. There are hundreds of organizations out there that need to review the way they manage people, the technology they're giving, and the spaces they're giving. So yes, it is frustrating, but there are still great opportunities for that to change. And together, I think that we can do that. look at it as an opportunity, and I'm never disappointed when opportunities present themselves.
On that note, Mark, thank you very, very much. As always, that's absolutely brilliant and fantastic. And may I ask everyone attending, if you do have something that you're working on, if you have a project, or you need to consider what is your short-term strategy or long-term strategy is going to look like when returning to work for the future, feel free to get in contact with myself and Mark. We'll be happy to share with you the insights and information that we have. Really appreciate you all for joining. Mark has just posted a little link onto our additional events that's coming up on hminsightgroup.com. Feel free to join any one of our additional events. If you could do us a favor and just say a quick thank you to Mark, we would really appreciate that. Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for taking the time to join us. There will be a follow-up email. I won't be sharing the slides, but I will be sharing lots of interesting links. Thank you very much for your time, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.